And in today's episode, I'm joined with the amazing Gabe Howard, who's a prominent mental health advocate, author, and speaker who brings a wealth of lived experience and professional expertise to the conversation surrounding mental health. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder after a period of intense personal struggle, Gabe turned his life around and dedicated himself to educating others about mental illness, reducing stigma, and offering hope. He's the author of Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations, which is a raw and insightful collection of personal essays that challenge societal perceptions of mental health. Gabe also hosts the Inside Mental Health podcast, where he interviews leading experts, shares his own journey, and provides an engaging and informative look into the world of mental health care. Gabe's work has been featured on platforms like Psychology Today, Healthline, and NBC News. His authenticity, humor, and candid approach make him such an impactful speaker and advocate, able to connect with diverse audiences. On my show today, I'm so honored to be with you, Gabe. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So, Gabe, why don't you tell my audience a bit more about your personal journey and what led you to your diagnosis of bipolar disorder?
So, I was committed to a psychiatric hospital. So the first thing that I want to say is what led me to a diagnosis of bipolar disorder was being committed to a psychiatric hospital.
Mm,
I
okay.
I mean, yeah, that's gonna, yeah, that's gonna clue you in real quick, right? But the part that I always like to touch on is if you would have asked me 10 minutes before I was admitted to the hospital if I was sick, I would have said no. If you would have asked me if I had any mental illness, I would have said no. I really, really believed that mental illness is what happened to other people who were evil, who had, bad upbringings, who had terrible parents, who suffered some sort of tragedy or traumatic experience. And I didn't have any of that. I am surprised to learn from like my audiences that they're just like, well, you had such a normal life. Your parents were good. And I'm like, why is it shocking to you? Why is it shocking to you that my parents were good? Now, I say that tongue in cheek because I know why they think that, because I thought it too. But obviously, I had all of the symptoms of bipolar disorder, the mania, the depression, the suicidality, the hypersexuality, grandiose thinking, the mood shifts that were incredible. One minute I thought I was a god, and then then later on I would think I was garbage, and that my mother would be happy if I was dead. But nobody noticed these things because, well, as I'm very fond of saying, you think we have bad mental health education in 2024, you can only imagine how bad the mental health education was in the 80s and 90s. So that's sort of a little bit of my story right there. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder after being admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and that began my 4-year epic battle against bipolar disorder. I finally reached recovery, and then I thought, okay, I need to be open about this experience.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. And during your admission, how was that 4 years that you were within the hospital?
No, I wasn't in the hospital for 4 years. Nobody will keep you for 4 years. I had good insurance, but that would be amazingly good insurance. So I was only in the hospital for a few days, and then I moved into intensive outpatient treatment, which is where you go for 8 hours a day, but you still sleep at home. And you have weekends off, and then after that, it stepped down into community care. Seeing a therapist, support groups, getting the medicine under control, but you're still leading a quote unquote normal life, and that you're not confined. It's but it took 4 years to get the coping skills down. Whoops.
Okay.
It took 4 years to get the coping skills down. It took 4 years to get the medication right. It took 4 years to gain experience, insight, and understanding. So it really took me 4 years to sort of master all of the things that you need to master to live a relatively normal life.
Amazing. Yeah. And so what was the turning point then, which inspired you to actually now become an advocate and speaker for mental health awareness?
It's really fascinating to me. The first thing that I want to say is I had the best of everything.
Mm.
I had, and literally the best of ever. I lived in a big city, so I had lots of treatment options. I was able to see a doctor. I had great health insurance. I had money. I had good supports in family and friends and the people around me. I really had all of these wonderful protective factors. And again, I cannot stress how important it is to have money. And I had that as well. And when I went through that, I thought that it was the most horrible experience and that the trauma and the suffering of that experience was so extreme that I needed to make it my life's work to fix it. So you can only imagine my shock when I realized that I was given Mercedes Benz care. And then I discovered that other people got like, used car care, and some people got bicycle care, and some people got bus pass care, and some people got no care. They just got nothing.
Mm.
And I just kind of assumed that everybody got treated like me while I was going through it. And that really cemented in my mind that something needed to be done. People were suffering, and that was unreasonable. And I felt that I needlessly suffered, based on ignorance, lack of education, lack of resources, and I just really wanted to do something about it.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, I can really feel that as well. And I guess a lot of that, do you think a lot of that comes down to you as a person, or like why is there so many differences in the way that people are treated?
I think it really comes down to money. I think it comes down to, I mean, look, in America, healthcare is divided up among your social class.
Mm.
It really is. I mean, that's just, I'm not saying mental health care either. Like healthcare is divided up among your social class. The, the better job you have, the better health insurance you have. The better health insurance you have, the more options that you have. The more money you have, the more extra care around your health care that you can get. Where you live in America, if you live in a small rural community with a small rural hospital, they might not have a cancer ward or a psychiatry ward, or on and on and on, because they have limited resources for limited people. If you live in a gigantic city, they may have a cancer ward, but it's not a world class cancer ward. It's not the one that wins it, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. I'm really fond of saying that when you hear the phrase, this is an excellent X, right? It stands to reason that that means that there must be a crappy version of X, and there are real people going there. And the big example that I use in America is people always say, "Well, I moved into a good school district." So you are admitting that you're okay with kids going to a bad school district. And we have that in healthcare, and we really have that in mental health care.
Wow, yeah. And I guess in a way, this is probably why you know, it's so different living in the UK, because we've got the National Health Service where everyone's provided equal care, and in the schooling systems, everyone's going.
Yeah, that sounds great. I don't know why we can't figure that out in America. In America, we get mad when you try to help sick people. Like we call that socialism, and we get all pissed off, and we start getting out the pitchforks, and we do the riot thing. Like, no, you will not take care of grandma when she's sick.
Oh,
It's messed up.
yeah.
It's really messed up, and I've really made it my life works to try to move this past politics and just really look at the human toll, and for everybody. I mean, sincerely, and I can't put a fine enough point on this. Even if you are not homeless, you have to deal with the homeless population. You have to walk past them. You have to see them. They interrupt your day, asking for resources or money or food, or just we hear about in the news people freezing to death in the winter. This has a toll on us. So even if you don't care about the homeless population, do you care about yourself?
Yeah.
Do you care about the fact that there are human beings who are suffering because the wealthiest nation in the world can't keep people warm in the winter?
Mm.
This bothers me. I think it's very nonpartisan. I don't think that this should be a political football to throw back and forth. I think that everybody should get on board with protecting the most vulnerable in our population. But frankly, we're not. It's just it's not a priority, and it's sad, but it's reality.
It is reality. Wow. I know. Thank you for bringing that to light for everybody, who's listening, because I feel like it's something which we should all be aware of to obviously it's going to start by us having these conversations to start making a change. So thank you for
Hey,
sharing that.
I figure the more people who hear about it, somebody somewhere has to have enough power. One of your listeners has to be a billionaire that wants to invest in the political system in America and will call me up and be like, Gabe, you're running for president. I will back you. And I'll be like, yes, thank you. And I can tell you right now, I guarantee it'll be a woman. Because all the men listening to this are just like, I don't know about this emotional stuff.
Mm,
But I'm telling you, there's got to be some rich woman out there, made her billions in tech, and she's ready to invest. So
yeah.
if you know her, give her a call. You can be my running. Oh no, you weren't born in it. You can't be my running mate. But I'll include you. You can be on the campaign, but unfortunately, yeah, you can't be vice president. I didn't make the rules. You got to be born in America. I know we're just
Amazing.
just a weird country filled with immigrants, yet you're required to be born here.
Oh
Just yeah,
boy.
yeah, I know. I
Laws,
know. It's a mess.
legislations. It's so boring. It's
It's a
like
mess. It's a mess. Yeah.
yes. So in your book, Mental Illness is an Asshole, I love that name.
Thank
So
you.
you
Thank
do
you.
actually provide honest and humorous insights into living with mental illness. So how has humor actually played a role in your whole journey?
Without humor, I'd have nothing. I really, really believe that. I've always responded well to, jokes, sarcasm. I really love dark humor, and it just I think that sometimes it's the only outlet. I once heard somebody say, if I wasn't laughing, I would be crying. And it really resonated with me because there were so many times that I just needed a strong emotion, and often crying would win. I cried myself to sleep a lot. I mean, that's the nature of depression. That's the nature of suicidality, right? That's the nature of the downsides of bipolar disorder. But sometimes I would laugh, and sometimes I would really look at my circumstances, and I would just be like, oh, this is funny. And sometimes I would even think this would be hilarious if it wasn't happening to me, and that would like make me laugh a little bit because it's not hilarious, but it just tickled my funny bone a little bit. And I really think that humor doesn't get enough respect in society. And I really think that dark humor doesn't get enough respect in our society because if you can look at something horrific and find a way to laugh, I really think that that frees the mind to find better paths forward. And that's why I'm sarcastic, and that's why I'm funny, and that's why I laugh at probably inappropriate things, maybe at inappropriate times, but I really feel like sometimes that's the only way out. It's so ridiculous that this would happen to a person that all you can do is laugh.
True, absolutely. I love that. Make it lighthearted, and again, a lot of that comes with healing because when you're kind of in that state of shock, then distress levels are high, and it does take a lot of work to try and minimize those distress levels, and then that ultimately can, then your funny side can then come out, and as we start to normalize these conversations as well, because sometimes even talking about this or people listening to this, it could be quite triggering for them.
Oh,
So
very, very much so. And humor in many ways is it does bring people together.
mm,
Believe it or not, it does. And I use an example a lot of, have you ever heard like laughter break out at a funeral?
oh,
And usually like a viewing, that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, not like in the heightened, but funerals in America are a long process. There's a couple of hours of like calling hours. There's everybody, but at some point we all have a story of just overhearing some laughter, and people, it's like, but they're dead, and that's really sad, but they've remembered a story. They've remembered something that the person did. And I remember giving my father-in-law's eulogy, and when I was giving it, I was trying to make the decision on whether or not I wanted to make jokes or not. And I decided just to go all in. I was going to make jokes, and the crowd laughed, and they came up to me afterwards like, you're right, he did do that, and we forgot about that. And yes, it had all the touching moments, it had all the sad moments, it had all the death is sad, and it's okay to be sad, but it's also okay to laugh. And the things that people remember about it were the times that they laughed with him. And I really felt like that brought more people together than if I was just like, hey, death sucks. They know that. Hey, we wish he was here. We all agree. And I've applied that over to mental illness as well. I wish I didn't have bipolar. I wish I wasn't suffering. I wish none of this happened, but it did. So I'm going to joke about it. And then people come over and they want to talk about it because they're like, hey, he's joking. He's fun. Let's have a conversation. And I've seen it work at funerals and with death to bring people closer together. And I really think it works with mental illness as well.
Amazing. That's good. Yeah, and keep laughing and keep saying jokes. I think that's amazing. Yeah.
But what else can you do? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, what else can you do? You can get angry at it.
Yeah.
Remember how I said laughter brings people together? Anger drives people away. In my early days, I was so enraged. I was enraged and angry and furious. Well, nobody wanted to, especially mental illness and anger. That's just one step away from violence. People avoid you like the plague for their own safety because they don't know what to do or say, or because they're scared. So yeah, anger does not make people want to help you. It makes people run from you. Humor makes people want to help you. It brings them closer. And those are two very big extremes. I think it takes a dude with bipolar disorder to play in both extremes. We got anger on one side and humor on the other. That's it. It's the bipolar method of life, I guess.
I love how you're just owning it as well, it's amazing, yeah.
I'm stuck with it.
Okay, yeah, so I want to talk more about the bipolar. So first of all, what do you think are the most common misconceptions about bipolar disorder?
I think the biggest misconception is that bipolar disorder is only two things, right? Bipolar, it has it in the names. You got highs and lows, right? So you've got hypomania slash mania on one side, and then you've got suicidal depression on the other. And that's where you get bipolar. It's the two opposite poles, right? And people just assume that one, those are the only two mood symptoms you have. Right, you either think you're a god in mania, hypomania, or you think you're garbage in the suicidal depression. But the reality is it exists on a spectrum. It does have those two poles, but those are the two extremes. There's also all of the other stops on the spectrum, including the middle. The normal, the average, the stereotypical. So it's really important to understand that people with bipolar disorder, when they're symptomatic, they may be hypomanic or manic. When they're symptomatic, they may be depressed or have suicidal depression. But it's also possible and quite likely and quite common that for long stretches, they'll be perfectly fine. And in a way, this causes a lot of problems because people then see your symptoms as aberrant. It's also, as I like to joke, when you're in the middle, stereotypical, normal, average, that's when you get the job. That's when you meet the girl. That's when you meet the friends. That's when you make all the connections, all the things that you lose when the symptoms start. So that's very problematic as well. The next thing is there are other symptoms of bipolar disorder than just the mania and the depression, right? There's also things like hypersexuality, grandiosity, going from thinking that you're the greatest thing to ever live to thinking that you're garbage. There's so much self-doubt. There's anxiety, and there's also possible psychosis. I experienced delusions where I thought that demons were chasing me and influencing my life and potentially hurting the people around me. Paranoia is another possible symptom. So there's all of these other symptoms that people with bipolar disorder experience, but the public is really like, oh, well, you either think you're a god or garbage. You think you're god or garbage. You're either manic or sad. You're either manic or sad, right? And it's like, no, it's a little more than that.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. And what treatment actually worked best for you?
So when we talk about what treatment worked best, this is always a difficult question to answer because I really feel that it's sort of like your home. If I said, hey, in your house, what is the most important utility? Like what utility works the best for you? And you'd be like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I like electric. And I'd be like, okay, so if the water was off, that would be fine. And you're like, no, 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 no. If my house didn't have water, I wouldn't like that at all. So I'm really fond of saying that the most important utility in your house is the one that's broken, right? We ignore electric, gas, heat, water, internet. As long as they're working, we don't care. But the minute one of them's broken, we pay attention to it. So in treatment and in my recovery, the one that was most important is the one that wasn't working. Medication certainly helped stabilize me, and I don't want to minimize how important that was. But medication with no therapy, with no coping skills, with no understanding, with no insight to my own experience, would have been pointless. Acceptance, I needed to accept my illness and really do all the right things. So that was important. Support groups provided so much insight, and I learned so many things from fellow sufferers of bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses that I could then apply to my own life, and that was really important. One-on-one therapy, to not only work out how I got here, but to work out how I was going to go forward. Invaluable. And then even things like, family support, friends, people who are just like, Gabe, we don't get it, but we love you. And also, I really can't downplay the role of, people being willing to give me another chance, forgiveness. I did a lot of things when I was, suffering from bipolar disorder. I yelled, I hate you at my mom. I was divorced. So, my first wife was not pleased at all. And on and on and on. So all of these things really have to gel together. Maybe a better example would be, think of your favorite recipe. And if somebody says, what's the most important ingredient? I mean, really, if you remove any ingredient, it's going to ruin the entire recipe. So I suppose you can argue which one will have the most impact on the recipe, but if your goal is to have a tasty dish, you don't want to remove anything. So the most important thing for me was understanding how they all fit together and really giving all of them the attention that they deserve.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And medicine, did that play a role as well?
Huge role.
Yeah.
I cannot deny medicine was absolutely phenomenal. It took these giant mood swings and or mood shifts. I just again, mood swing is such a bad term with bipolar disorder because everybody has mood swings. These are more like mood tidal waves. Uh, it's a bit like saying that the is it storming outside? No, it's a hurricane. So it's not a storm, it's a hurricane, right? We want to make sure we get the right wording here, but the medication helped move them into manageable areas. They helped me be able to think clearly. They stopped things like racing thoughts so that I could actually control my thoughts and think clearly, make rational decisions, show up on time to support groups and really evaluate my life in a reasonable way. But I always like to stress because some people are just like, well, take your meds and you'll be fine. If I would have just taken my meds and done nothing else, I would not have been fine. They're not magic, they're helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they're to be used alongside other interventions as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Perfect. Yeah. And so do you feel like there's a lot of undiagnosed bipolar out there?
It's that's a tough one to answer. In many ways, I think that bipolar disorder is overdiagnosed,
Oh,
and that really worries me. But again, if just because something is overdiagnosed doesn't mean that it can't also be underdiagnosed, right? It's
true.
a difficult illness to diagnose, and
Mm,
the reason that I say that is because when people are manic, they feel great. It's dangerous and scary, but feelings wise, it feels great. People don't end up in hospitals usually when they're manic, unless they get arrested or there's other interventions, etc. But
mm,
uh, usually people present in hospitals with depression, with the suicidality, with the garbage feelings. And a doctor may say, hey, have you ever been happy? No, I've never been happy. And they're not lying. In that's what suicidality is. That's what depression is. It's this lack of insight into the full picture. I experience suicidal depression, and people are like, have you ever been happy? No, I've never been happy. It's a lie. It's untrue. But to me, it feels real. I feel like I've honestly never been happy. So since there's no blood test, no DNA test, no cheek swab, no hair sample, you've got to rely on the person. So I do know a lot of people who get diagnosed with like major depressive disorder, and then the mania comes out, and then the doctor is able to observe it, and then bipolar comes. So in that way, there's sort of a takes a little bit to get diagnosed. But unfortunately, you can't have the underdiagnosis conversation without having the overdiagnosis conversation, and that becomes problematic as well. So the whole thing is problematic.
yeah.
But getting the right diagnosis is absolutely key.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned something really important earlier on as well, is the fact that, when we think about depression and suicide and any kind of, PTSD or trauma related symptoms, then we always associate that with, childhood trauma, right? So does bipolar have a reason for it? I mean, is it just due to chemical imbalance in the brain or?
Nobody really knows what causes bipolar disorder. There's lots of research out there from the chemical imbalance theory that has largely been debunked, but there's still people who cling to it, and it's still an area of research. So you never know when it'll swing back around as we learn more about the brain. Environment definitely plays a role, but it's a little bit like PTSD in soldiers, right? You can send a platoon of soldiers into the identical area, and some will be completely unfazed. Some will be like, ooh, that wasn't good, and I don't really want to talk about it. Some will be like, oh my God, I'm an adrenaline junkie, and this was incredible. And then some people will suffer from post traumatic stress disorder so bad that they need medical care for the rest of their lives. And nobody can figure out why, especially with soldiers, because they're all generally the same age. They've received the same training, the same screening, and they're all put in the same situation, and yet we get wildly different outcomes.
Sure.
So bipolar disorder might have a component of it's in there, but if your environment is always perfect, it'll never come out. Whereas if your environment has maybe some trauma or some triggering, that will trigger it. Same thing with PTSD. The soldiers who have PTSD may never have developed PTSD if they had never gone into a war zone, or if they had never had this heightened sense. If their life had been different, then they may not have suffered it. But something was in there that combined.
Mm.
Now, again, I want to make sure that your audience knows that these are areas of research and things are being studied, and nobody really truly knows. But I don't want to say that environment plays no role, because clearly if you are prone to bipolar disorder and you have a lot of trauma, tragedy, instability, etc., you are more likely to experience stronger episodes, more episodes, and on and on and on. So your environment does factor into it, but how much so is still an area of debate.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And so just regarding your podcast then, because it's a fantastic podcast and you obviously bring together a
Oh,
lot of
thank you.
experts and personal stories to educate listeners. So what's been your most memorable episodes or conversations for you to date?
There's been a couple. The very first time that I got to interview the director of the National Institute of Mental Health in America. The National Institute of Mental Health is like the top government agency that just really, or government funded agency that just really tracks all things mental health. I mean, they fund a lot of research. They're a research organization. It's it's incredibly difficult for somebody with bipolar disorder just to sit down with the person who runs that organization and say, hey, what's going on? What makes you tick? What research do you have? What do you know? And I was really excited as an individual to be able to ask questions, but I was also very excited to be able to get him to explain things in a way that like my dad could understand. And that's really the goal of the podcast. I want everybody listening to have access to this really high level. So that was a really amazing moment for me. And I was really proud of it. And I really thought I'm helping shape the narrative and educate people in a way that they can understand it using literally some of the finest mental health minds in the country. But then I got to interview Alanis Morissette. Alanis Morissette from You Oughta Know fame. I Am the Right Age. She was huge when I was in high school and right out of high school. I mean, in my formative years, she was just incredible. I love her. She is core to my musical DNA. Plus, she is just the coolest person ever. And I was excited to interview her on the show. But then after the show was over, I was like, oh my God. Listen, I like celebrities. Everybody likes celebrities. Celebrities are fine, right? But the vast majority of celebrities, after I'm done interviewing, I'm like, hey, they're a great rock star, but I don't necessarily see them being like my BFF, right? They lead very different lives. They're fun to work with. I love to see their shows, but there's not necessarily that human connection. I really felt like I connected with Alanis Morissette, and I don't connect with a lot of people. I mean, she was just really down to earth. She talked about her own depression. She talked about how, she gets labeled, angry and pissed off. And she's like, I'm not really angry and pissed off. I'm just, I was angry and pissed off about that. And, we talked about being multitudinous, which is a word that I'd never heard before. So I learned about that. She was funny. She kind of had this dark sense of humor, kind of like I do. So the whole experience was just like a really fun conversation and a really fun time. And it's one of the experiences that I'm sort of happy that I got to have. The episode was great. People like the episode. That's obviously the goal of podcasting, is to make the listener happy. But that one also made me really happy. It sort of transcended work at that point, and I really felt like I was just talking to somebody about life. And that doesn't always happen.
Very true. Oh wow, no, I'm really, really pleased to hear that. And yeah, I'm also an 80s girl, so yeah, I totally can resonate. Yeah.
And she's just amazing. I mean, I just it sounds like hero worship and fanboy, and it a little bit is. I'm not stupid, but she really, she's just she was just easy to connect with, and I connected with her. And look, I'm spoiler alert, we didn't become best friends. We're not traveling the country. She doesn't text me. We're not calling each other every weekend and gossiping. I mean, she doesn't even know my name. I guarantee that if I walked up to her right now and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Gabe," she'd be like, "Nice to meet you, Gabe," and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, this meant nothing to you." And I don't mean that mean. She meets a lot of people. Like, that's not. But it just really let me know that she's as real as I thought she was.
Mm,
And there's that phrase, "Don't meet your heroes," because they always let you down. And that's not because they're bad. It's just because they're human and they can't live up to the expectation. Alanis Morissette was one of the few people who lived up to the expectation, and that's awesome. I got really, really lucky, and I'm forever grateful for it. And it makes her music more fun. It makes her concerts more fun. It makes following it on social media more fun, just because I feel like we're kind of the same type of people,
mm.
except she's Canadian and rich and a once in a lifetime musical talent, and I'm a podcaster from Ohio. Other than that, we're exactly the same.
You're a mental health advocate. That's a very valuable role to be in. So yeah, know yourself. But yeah, so talking about mental health advocacy, how do you see the landscape changing then now or in the future?
I mean, the landscape has really changed a lot. Some for the good, some for the better. I will be the first to admit that I'm a little bit pessimistic about some of the stuff that's happening. Um, I don't really like the trend of turning mental illness into a superpower. Mental illness doesn't make you quirky. It doesn't make you unique. It's got a 15% death rate. The suicide rate is raising. I understand why people want to reframe to the positive. I really, really do. But I also see this suffering firsthand. I see the prison systems and the jail systems and the homelessness and the people in drop-in centers. And then I look at the middle class version on social media, and I'm just like, it's not a superpower. It doesn't make you quirky or unique. It can potentially lead to death. And I struggle with that because on one hand, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but on the other hand, I think we veered into toxic positivity levels. So I think that needs to adjust. I really, really do. I also worry about pathologizing normal behavior. I read a study that said 70% of Gen Z has a diagnosable anxiety disorder. That's statistically impossible. That cannot hold up. Now, if you said that 70% of Gen Z has anxiety, I would absolutely believe that. But anxiety is normal. They have things to be anxious about. It's a tumultuous time for them. They're starting the world. Everything is new. There's a lot of failure when you're new, and that can be anxiety provoking. You don't know where you're going to end up. There's debt, there's world issues, et cetera. So I understand them being anxious, but the solution to that is that we need to learn how to manage anxiety. The solution to that is not, "Oh, you're sick and you need medication and treatment for the rest of your life." So that worries me a little bit, that we're sort of, pathologizing normal emotions and now declaring them illnesses when they're actually not. It also worries me because any talk about this could make somebody who is suffering from severe anxiety, severe panic disorder, the inability to leave their house or to function, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, well, I heard on this podcast that this is normal." So now they may not be seeking help. So these conversations, they swing the pendulum the other way to the small percentage of people who do need help might think that they're in the "oh, we don't need help" category. So all of these things kind of stress me out a little. I do like that mental health is a bigger conversation. And I think that an unintended consequence of a bigger conversation is that means more mistakes will be made. But hopefully, we are working to resolve those mistakes. So I'm very happy that mental health has entered the American zeitgeist. I'm very happy that people are openly discussing it. I do worry that this is minimizing conversations on severe and persistent mental illness like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. But I like that the conversation is widening. I like that we are having these things. And even in I'm worried that maybe we're going in the wrong directions. You've got to sometimes go in the wrong direction so that you can correct and go in the right direction. We've all made wrong turns in our car. It's not the end of the world. We're lost for a bit. We find the right path and then we carry on, and it's part of the adventure. So overall, I'm very, very optimistic. But I did want to call out that I think there's some areas that we need to pay attention to and improve.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And yeah, you again, when it comes to Gen Z population, well, I guess we're going to see the consequences of all the technology that they're all obsessed with. It's just taken over, hasn't it? And I guess we don't know the implications of that just yet.
We don't. It's very scary, but look, every generation has this. And I think that's important to understand because every generation has something. The boomers, they went through, being just like this gigantic generation that was, spawned by the end of a war. And, they've carried that with them their whole lives, and that's impacted their generation. The millennials had 9/11, a terrorist attack on American soil, and all of those changes that brought. I mean, just all generations have things, and the other generations either ignore it, help with it, react to it. We all have opinions on it. So this is in fact more of the same, but it's interesting to think what's going to happen and how are the other generations going to respond.
Yeah,
And I tell you, we haven't always responded kindly. Oh, excuse me.
true.
America has been very cruel to millennials, and I'm hoping that we're not cruel to Gen Z. That said, I hope that we're not too nice to them either. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes hard truths really, really matter. My life is better because people told me things I didn't want to hear and hurt my feelings. And I hope that we don't coddle any generation too much, but I also hope that we're not too mean to any generation as a society. And I think we have a tendency to do both.
Yeah. True, yeah, I know. But back in the 80s when we were raised, tough love was, it worked obviously for us at the time.
Hey, I
Bullshit.
love tough love. I'm a huge fan of it. Unfortunately, I say the things out loud that maybe you shouldn't say. But hey, at least you know where you stand with me. Nobody's guessing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Blunt as they get.
Yay, kindred spirit.
Amazing. So what advice would you give to somebody who may be currently struggling with their own mental health diagnoses or feeling hopeless?
Oh, please reach out. You can handle this on your own. For some reason in mental health care, we believe that we have to diagnose ourselves or completely understand what's happening before we make an appointment with a therapist or talk to our general practitioner or go to a support group. But we don't have this in regular health. In regular physical health, if you think that something is wrong, if you have a suspicion that something is wrong, if you feel, quote, under the weather, unquote, people will run to a doctor and just say, "Hey, I'm not feeling right. Can you fix it?" And we're cool with that. We need to be that way in mental health as well. The worst case scenario is that you schedule an appointment with a therapist or a doctor, and they're like, "Hey, nothing's wrong with you, right? You're cool," and then you've got that reassurance. But I think all of us can learn some skills, and I really recommend people who are feeling hopeless, find that therapist, find that support group, because there are ways to find meaning, but it's not easy. I think we've really convinced ourselves as a society that the things that we like will just present themselves. And one of the first things that I learned in therapy, which seemed like such an easy lesson, but that I didn't know, was that you've got to try a bunch of different things. go to the event that looks boring, watch the movie that looks sucky, go out with your friends to the restaurant that you're positive you're going to hate. Just be open to new experiences. And what's the worst that could happen? You didn't like the movie, you didn't like the show, you didn't like the restaurant. Okay. But now you know. And maybe you'll find stuff that you did like about it. Like, oh, I did not like the food at that fancy restaurant, but I really liked the service. So, I'm going to find maybe an expensive restaurant more in my taste. And then the next thing you know, that bad experience leads you to the good one, right? It's kind of like dating, right? I mean, you just go out on the first date and see what happens. It doesn't mean you have to have a second, just, experience life. I
Excellent.
was unaware of that. I was always concerned about all of these things. So the, hopelessness is a lot. And so many people wait until it gets really, really bad before they ask for help. And it really is the literal equivalent of, waiting until you're on your deathbed before you call a doctor. Call your doctor when you first get sick, and you'll be better off. Call a therapist, go to a support group, reach out to friends and family when you first start noticing something. Don't wait until it reaches the crisis point.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And I know that you're a real big advocate for self-care and support systems. So what's been the most important aspect of your own self-care routine?
I would probably say honesty. When I think about my support, I've had to be honest with them, and sometimes that means pushing back. Sometimes it means telling them what I want. Sometimes it means telling them what they're not allowed to do. The example that always comes up is, did you take your meds today? Did you take your meds today? Right? The people around you, they want to ask you that question, 20,000 times a day. And, setting that boundary that, hey, you're not allowed to ask me that question, becomes very reasonable. But with some people, they have a right to ask that question. My wife has a right to ask that question. Now, I've educated her that, hey, that question does hurt my feelings. So when you ask, I need you to be a little more sure. Don't just throw that out because we got in a fight and then you're like, well, did you take your meds today? Is that why we're fighting? Like, maybe explore some other avenues first. Because I really hear it as kind of an insult. You're blaming everything on bipolar disorder. And she's like, oh, well, I didn't think about it that way at all. Having those conversations is really, really valuable. Also, knowing when you've had too much, or knowing when you need pushed. Sometimes I tell my friends, hey, encourage me to go out, but know when I can't. Encourage me to fight through it, but also know when I can't. And there's just a lot of conversation and education that comes with that. And I think these are valuable, valuable parts of self-care, really training your support system to know how to help you and to know what to do. And so many people are afraid to have those conversations. And so many people only have those conversations when things go wrong. The worst time to have a fire drill is when the house is on fire. You
Yeah.
need to have these conversations when everything is fine.
Yeah.
Just on a random Wednesday when everything's going well, say, hey, I'm probably going to be depressed again at some point. I hope I'm not, but I might be. And here are some things that you could do that would help me. And then the person will probably say, are you depressed right now? Do you think you're going to be depressed? Or you're worried? No, no, no. I want to tell you what helps me. So that way that when this happens, you're not flying blind, and have this great conversation and then go on with your life and hope you never need it. I mean, I've been through dozens, probably 100 fire drills in my life. I have never been in a fire, but I don't regret any of those fire drills. And I would be really suspicious of somebody that said, as soon as this building catches on fire, we're going to do a drill. That's the wrong time.
Yeah, that is a long time. Oh, wow, amazing. Yeah, because I know you also talk about setbacks and challenges in your book. So, how do you normally handle these moments when they arise?
I mean, you have to accept them as they come. Setbacks are part of life. You just need to expect them.
Yeah.
Setbacks happen everywhere. For some reason, when it happens with our mental health, with bipolar disorder, with major depressive disorder, with schizophrenia, with psychosis, whenever we have we tend to give them more weight because we're scared and because it affects our health. And of course, mental illness impacts our ability to think clearly. So that helps amplify it. So the first thing that I remind people is that one, setbacks are normal. If you're not having setbacks, you're cured. There is no cure, so you're never going to be cured. So setbacks are just going to happen. The next thing that I remind people is setbacks happen everywhere. Setbacks happen in parenting, setbacks happen in relationships, setbacks happen in our careers, setbacks happen in our hobbies. You've never, been practicing the piano and hit the wrong note. That is a setback. You've never played something beautifully 100 times, and then you go to play it for the 101 and and you're like, what happened? Why did this happen? People as they age, woodworkers who've worked with their hands their whole life, they develop a little bit of arthritis, or their hands just don't move in the exact way, so they have to adjust. That is a setback. All of these things happen routinely and commonly, and people just find ways to work around them because people are generally resilient. But for some reason, whenever a setback happens with our mental health, we're like, uh-oh, it's the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
Don't turn it into a catastrophe. Look at the setback, evaluate it, make amends, fix it, figure out what your path is moving forward, and then do it. Own it, take responsibility for it. If you hurt somebody in the process, don't say, oh, it was bipolar disorder that did it. Nope, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. Fix it with them, apologize, make amends, do whatever you have to do there, and then move forward with your life knowing that, hey, everybody makes mistakes, everybody has setbacks, and this is just part of the human experience.
It is absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Such
Thank
a
you.
valuable
Thank you.
insight for everybody. So, what are you working on anything now for the future?
I do have the Inside Bipolar podcast now. So it launched a couple of years ago. So I guess it's not in the future, but it comes out weekly, and it's doing incredibly well. And I love the Inside Bipolar podcast because I finally got to do something that I've wanted to do for a long, long time, and that is partner with a board certified psychiatrist. I always felt that podcasts were always lacking. They were either 100% from the medical perspective, which is very valuable, or they were 100% from the patient lived experience perspective, which is very, very valuable. But I felt like people had to choose which one they wanted. Ideally, I'd like people to listen to both sides, right? And but people don't. They end up siloed. So I was able to create a podcast that has the lived experience perspective, that's mine,
Mhm.
and has the medical perspective, that's Dr. Nicole's, a board certified psychiatrist. And spoiler alert, we disagree a lot. We go back and forth, we argue about things, we find ways to explain things in ways that people can understand, and sometimes we disagree, sometimes we point out things that the other one doesn't like. And I think when somebody gets done listening to the 35-minute episode, 35-40-minute episode, they really get a well balanced perspective of both living with it, managing it, treating it, and what other people around you are experiencing, feeling, and seeing. And I think all of that insight can only help people get better. Also, not for nothing, it's really nice when you listen to a podcast and you get some medical advice, and then you get some, coping skills, some practical advice. And you're getting it from people who have walked the walk, and you're getting it from people who have treated it. So you just really end up with, I think, a much richer experience as far as learning about bipolar disorder. And that is what I am most proud of. And that is what I spend just so much time on. I love Inside Mental Health. I don't want anybody to think, oh, he hates Inside Mental Health now. No, no, no. It's just a different type of show that has a different audience and a different
Yeah.
goal. Inside Bipolar is so near and dear to my heart.
Oh, I can see that. Amazing. Yeah, and I'll be dropping all the links in this episode. And where can my listeners connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me at gabehoward.com. My book, Mental Illnesses and Assholes, available wherever books are sold. But if you buy it from gabehoward.com, I'll sign it and throw in a bunch of swag. I love it when people order it off my website because, one, it brings people to my website. But two, I get to sign it and write little notes and throw in stickers and stuff like that. But yeah, and I'd love it if somebody hired me in the UK to speak. Like, that'd be wonderful. I got to go to Oxford and speak, and that was just incredible. And I would just love to get back to England, especially on somebody else's dime. So if anybody out there needs a speaker, absolutely hit me up right now, and I will bring my honesty and candor and hopefully awesomeness straight to you, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, yes, I know. I saw that about you coming to Oxford. I think that was amazing. Oxford,
Oh, it
you.
was incredible. I lack the words. I lack the words. I can't shut up. I lack the words to explain just what it meant to me. It was an incredible feeling.
Oh, I feel that. Absolutely. So, yeah, again, reach out to this amazing being, this amazing soul, and we've got so many universities here that that have mental health departments. So yeah.
be awesome. It'd be awesome.
Yeah,
I get to see
exactly.
Stonehenge again. Woo!
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Gabe. It's been such an honor having you on. And you're just full of absolute wisdom, insights, and knowledge. And yeah, I can't wait to, keep connecting with you through your podcast and all the work that you're doing. And hopefully see you in England soon as well.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Oh, beautiful. That's all we got time for today, my beautiful listeners. Hope you enjoyed the show. And yeah, get in touch if you have any comments or questions about this show. And do connect with Gabe. Thank you. Bye, everyone.